remember kids, don't take candy from strangers. Unless it's that one week in October, then it's totally fine. Hi, I'm Joe. Welcome to Concerning Cafe. I love Halloween. It's such a fun time of year, but as I've gotten older, what makes less and less sense to me is just all of these news stories you hear about hospitals and police departments offering to scan your kids' trick-or-treat candy for drugs and poison. I mean, what self-respecting drug dealer would be willing to give kids free drugs? They don't have money, so if they get hooked, it's just a sad story. No money in it for them. But what about poison? Has anybody gotten poisoned from Halloween candy? Despite all of these offers in the news, it's happened a lot less often than you may have thought. But it happens. Perhaps the most infamous case of this happening was in 1974 in a neighborhood in Pasadena, Texas. A 12-year-old boy, Timothy O'Bryan, was trick-or-treating with his sister and his dad, Ronald Clark O'Bryan. It was unfortunately raining that night, so they didn't have the best luck with their trick-or-treating. They only went to about 2 blocks, and then they gave up. But during their trick-or-treating, they stopped at one house, and they didn't answer. Being so eager to trick-or-treat, Ronald told his kids to go run along to the next house, and he would double back to that one that didn't answer and see if he could get them to answer the door. Well, he came back to his kids and their neighbor trick-or-treating and produced 5 pixie sticks. He told them that when he went back to that house, he was able to successfully have the homeowner answer the door, upon which he gave him these pixie sticks. Like I mentioned, it was raining that night, so shortly after this, when they were done with the block, they decided to call it quits and go home. Being an eager kid with all of his candy, Timothy decided to go through it and have a few pieces. But when he got to the pixie stick, there was something weird about it. It was already opened at one end and sealed shut with a staple. And the candy inside was all clumped together. So he had his dad help him pound the candy out into a powder again. He ate the candy, and unfortunately a few minutes later he said he didn't feel well. He had stomach problems. He said it tasted bitter, and his dad gave him Kool-Aid to help him deal with that bitterness and maybe feel a little bit better. I think you know where this story is going. So, obviously, it didn't help all that much. He ran to the bathroom, started throwing up, and having convulsions. His dad, Ronald, said he held Timothy in the bathroom as he was shaking and seizing until he went limp in his arms. Less than an hour after he ate the candy and before the ambulance could take him to the hospital, Timothy died. Concerned community members and parents took their kids' candy to the hospital and asked them to screen it for drugs. However, all of the candy, both in Pasadena and where Timothy lived, turned up negative. So this is already starting to look pretty weird, right? I mean, we have a kid that ate some trick-or-treat candy, and other people in the neighborhood had actually gone trick-or-treating where Timothy and his dad did. But none of their candy had poison or drugs or anything else in it. That being said, the police didn't really suspect his parents yet. At least until an autopsy came through. When the autopsy came back, they found that there was potassium cyanide found in the kid's system. I should mention that one of the kids who also got a pixie stick decided to choose that night. His parents were going through his candy and couldn't find it, hurried over to his room, and luckily they weren't too late. They found him fast asleep holding it, presumably because he couldn't get the staple off of the candy, in order to open it and eat it. That being said, the rest of the pixie sticks were able to be retrieved by the police. What they found was that 2 to 3 inches at the top of the pixie sticks each had powdered potassium cyanide on top. For context, potassium cyanide is a chemical compound used in manufacturing. Usually you'll see it in pharmaceuticals and plastics, but it resembles sugar. If it's ingested, as I think we all know through at least movies, if not some other historical contexts, it's very dangerous when ingested. It can cause shortness of breath, lung paralysis, and obviously death. And when Timothy ingested the pixie stick, he had absorbed enough potassium cyanide to kill 2 adults. And the rest of the candies that those other 4 kids had gotten, including the one of the kid who couldn't get open the staple, had enough potassium cyanide in them to unalive 4 adults. Okay, so like I had said, they didn't suspect his parents until after the autopsy came back. They considered his dad a suspect because he was with them that night, and once again, he was the one who gave them the pixie sticks. Nobody else saw this person that came out of their house and gave them to the dad. This is where it starts to get a little weird because the police interrogated Ronald, and he had told them that after he had left his kids, he went back to that one house that didn't answer their door, and he was given those pixie sticks that he gave to his kids. He said he didn't see the occupant, just a hairy arm stick out, which is also kind of strange because you would think that you would see more than just an arm if you're getting pixie sticks, you know? Okay, so since he couldn't remember the face of the person, he also didn't remember what house it was. But, like I said, it was raining, so they didn't go to too many places. They figured they could easily go with Ronald to the neighborhood and have him retrace his steps and point at which house it must have been. Well, they got there, and he just led them on like a wild goose chase. He said, "No, it couldn't have been that one. I don't think it was that one." He would double back to houses, stop and pretend like maybe it was, and then move on. This all happened with Ronald walking around the neighborhood with them 3 times before he finally stopped at a house, pointed and said, "Yeah, that's the one." Now they did question the rest of the houses in the neighborhood to see what other candy was given out, and none of them said pixie sticks. So this house had to be the one because of the process of elimination. It's the only option left. So they go to the house, and it turns out that the house is owned by an air traffic controller at the nearby airport. Unfortunately for Ronald, he has a solid, tight alibi. He was working at the airport that night until about 11:30 and wouldn't be back home until after midnight. And sure, it was the 70s and they didn't have security cameras everywhere and all this technology to keep track of people like we do now, but over 200 people backed up that he was at the airport that night. There was no way he was getting out of this. So the cops were pretty suspicious of Ronald already. But then they found out that he was in so much debt. He owed people $100,000, which was in 1974 money. That equates to about $600,000 today. He also couldn't hold a job, which didn't help things. Over the last decade, he had held 21 different jobs. And around this time, he was also being suspected of stealing from his job that he currently had and was soon to be fired. His car was also recently repossessed, his mortgage was behind, and he also had other loans that were outstanding. What made things really tip over the edge for the police, though, was that they discovered in the months leading up to the poisoning and Timothy's death, Ronald had taken out an insurance policy on both his son and his daughter. The amount came to around $60,000, which is a bit over $100,000 today. Yeah, parents will take out insurance policies on their kids because tragedies happen and funerals are expensive. But even the insurance company in this case is like, that doesn't seem necessary. Kicking that even more over the edge is the fact that a few days before they went trick-or-treating, Ronald took out another $20,000 policy on Timothy. And then the morning after his son died, Ronald called the insurance company and asked how he could collect on Timothy's life insurance. Which, yeah, for funerals, they tend to move kind of quick. But it is kind of weird to be like, oh, my son died. How can I get money? Just like, most parents would be grieving, or even just like most parents and other loved ones would be grieving for a little while before they even thought about the funeral or paying for it. So it is kind of weird that he would just call them right away. What really set it over the edge for the police, though, was the fact that leading up to the trick-or-treat day, Ronald visited a chemical supply store in Houston, asking for potassium cyanide. But he left when he found out that the smallest amount that they would sell him was 5 pounds. And so, Ronald Clark O'Bryan was arrested on November 5th, 1974, on suspicion of murdering his son Timothy O'Bryan for life insurance money. He ended up being charged with 1 count of murder for his son and 4 attempted murder charges for the other 4 pixie sticks he gave out that night. His daughter, that 1 kid that fell asleep with it, and those other 3 pixie sticks that he gave away. The trial only sealed his fate further because during it, some chemical experts testified that he showed up to their stores or inquired in different ways about where to buy cyanide and how much would kill a person. His friends and family then got on the stand, which, usually they'll get up there and say, no, this guy was a good person, or I never thought he would do anything. But instead, they mostly talked about how strange he was acting after his son died, and saying that he would be spending the insurance money on vacations and maybe a nice car or a boat. After a while, it was time for his wife to testify, and she said that not only had Timothy chosen the pixie stick, but he had chosen it specifically because his dad told him to go for that piece of candy. So his dad knew exactly what he was doing. Timothy's main defense in all of this during the trial was that there was some stranger out there who was poisoning candy, which goes to show that this whole urban legend about poisoning candy goes back much further than just the past 5 decades. So after all of this questioning of witnesses and Ronald himself, the jury deliberated for only 46 minutes and they came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Despite all this personal tragedy, his wife ended up having a happy life after that. She remarried, and the guy she got married to even adopted her daughter as his own, and I think that's very sweet. Ronald didn't have a happy time in prison because nobody likes child murderers, especially other prisoners. O'Bryan was held on death row in a prison near Huntsville, Texas, and a chaplain there said he had no friends and he was basically an outcast with the others on death row. And the chaplain said that he was basically friendless because he had murdered his own kid. The social disconnect between him and other prisoners was even so bad that when it came time for his execution, the prisoners who were outside of it were seen celebrating, and they wanted to have their own celebration in the main hall of the prison, but this was obviously shut down for several reasons. Appeals are common when you're on death row, and Ronald was pretty successful with his. He appealed the date of his execution 3 times, and this guy was so looked down upon that for one of them, Ronald was offered the drive to the execution site by the judge himself. The fourth and final appeal was not successful, and they reached a date of March 1984, and he was also the first person in Texas to be executed by lethal injection. As the execution was happening inside, people could be heard shouting "trick or treat" and throwing candy. And that was the end of the real-life Candyman, Ronald Clark O'Bryan. Hi there. If you're watching this, thank you for reaching the end of the video. Why don't you let me know in the comments what your favorite tradition is for Halloween? Subscribe, and I'll see you next time.